All right. So I just finished chapter 6 of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. And this chapter is called The Non-Commercial. So we're breaking it down, analyzing it a bit, which I'll do with every chapter of the book. And this one's going to be a bit of a long one, so I might break it up into two parts. So to begin things off, non-commercial means just that. It's a chapter focused on the social aspect of life, because 3 months ago, Hank's wife, Lillian, she decided she was going to throw a party for their anniversary, and she made sure that he promised to be there. And he promised to be there. Now he's not so happy he made that promise, but he's going to go to this party, and he's pretty upset about it because everybody always busts his beans because he's so serious. He's all business all the time, works like 18-hour days. He's so focused on Reardens metal that his home life kind of takes a beating. He doesn't really care about that stuff. And his family doesn't appreciate what he's into, so it's kind of a rough mix. And so, yeah, he's kind of getting ready for this party before he goes downstairs. And that's where they drop us into this chapter. And he's staring in a mirror, which is something we should keep in mind because it's a lot of mirror symbolism happening here. The reflection of himself. So he hears like in his head, "You don't care for anything but business." And it talks about how, business is like something you should wash off when you get home, like grease off your hands if you're a mechanic. And he doesn't really do that. So he took it for granted, wordlessly, in the manner of a feeling absorbed in childhood, left unquestioned and unnamed, that he had dedicated himself, like the martyr of some dark religion, to the service of a faith which was his passionate love, but which made him an outcast among men whose sympathy he was not to expect. So he didn't really care about fitting in. And he understood that, for him, his business was him. What the work that he did in the world was what he was supposed to be here to do. And he didn't care. He didn't want to explain himself. He had given Lillian none of his time for months, for the 8 years of their marriage. If Lillian resented his attitude, he thought, she was right. If her manner toward him was objectionable, he deserved it. If his family called him heartless, it was true. So yeah, he didn't really have heart for the family. They aren't passionate about what he's passionate about. He's not passionate about decorations and shit at the house, right? Social gatherings. And that's where they basically drop us. And it makes sense. He's not very happy with the family and the social life. Now, while he's getting ready, we kind of really get into it because he's got all this mail that he hasn't gone over, had time to go over. And then a newspaper clipping drops and he reads the article that he was supposed to read. A newspaper clipping fluttered down to the floor. It was an editorial which his secretary had marked with an angry slash in red pencil. It was entitled Equalization of Opportunity. The editorial said that at a time of dwindling production, shrinking markets, and vanishing opportunities to make a living, it was unfair to let one man hoard several business enterprises, while others had none. It was destructive to let a few corner all the resources, leaving others no chance. So the editorial predicted the passage of a bill which had been proposed, a bill forbidding any person or corporation to own more than one business concern. So all of a sudden, the government's getting involved more. And you got the media backing them up. You got this editorial coming out, and the editorial is right what the editors think, what the producers of the paper think. And they think you should give up your stuff, the stuff that you produce, to other people who are less productive because they say so. And because, other people have a need. And it's tough for other people out there. It's tough because you dumbed them down with this type of propaganda in the media in the first place. Having dealt with the clean reality of metals, technology, production all of his life, he had acquired the conviction that one had to concern oneself with the rational, not the insane. That one had to seek that which was right, because the right answer always won. That the senseless, the wrong, the monstrously unjust could not work, could not succeed, could do nothing but defeat itself, which I really like that sort of thought process, but it's not necessarily true, right? He has to face these things. He just keeps going under the assumption that it's so nuts, it's so nonsensical, that it has to implode upon itself. But it's like, if you leave that nonsense unchecked for so long, it grows like a cancer right within the society, and it ultimately could defeat you. So he's not giving the irrational, the illogical, the unknown its proper credit, its proper respect, it seems. Even though he's very logical, we can all commend him for that. He's not doing that. He kind of, relates this thing, says it says it's embarrassing to him, as if he were suddenly asked to compete with a man who calculated steel mixtures by the formulas of numerology. So even though numerology isn't necessarily logical mathematically speaking, rationally, numerology, sort of transcends the boundaries, right? And links number with letter. And algebra starts to come into the fold there, where you have symbols representing and denoting numbers and quantities. And then symbolism and all its infinite associations start to come into the mix. And he's kind of discrediting these spiritual aspects of himself, either suppressing them or not dealing with them. And that's clearly set to be the tone of the book. He's ignoring it. He doesn't think it's important right now. Or he just hasn't found the fact that he hasn't found his spirit within these things. He hasn't realized that there's a lot of the metaphysical in the production of the physical. So he's not motivated by the social life, and he knows he's going to get reamed for it. So it says, to recognize one's guilt, yet feel nothing but the coldest, most profound indifference. Wasn't it a betrayal of that which had been the motor of his life course and of his pride? So he's questioning himself because he doesn't want to go through with this stuff. He felt like it's the right thing to do for his wife and his family and all these things, but he also doesn't want to do it. So he's sort of questioning his morality about it, which is reasonable. So in the beginning, it says that he wanted to tear the bracelet that he made off his wife's wrist, the one that he gave her, the chain in chapter 2, that she didn't really appreciate. And so he goes down into the party, and then we get to Dr. Pritchett, who is a philosophy teacher. And I think he's a teacher at Danconia's University. It'll be revealed in this chapter. And he goes down to this party, and we start to hear some of the dialogue at the party. Man? What is man? He's just a collection of chemicals with delusions of grandeur. So I wrote here, they're dehumanizing. So yeah, they're reducing humans to chemicals with delusions. And this reminds me of the meme where it's like, you got the guy, he sees the little bacteria on the planet Mars, and he thinks to himself, wow, we found life on Mars, but then they're going to go abort like a 3-month-old fetus or a 6-month-old fetus. And they're like, wow, that's not really a life yet, And it's like, not to get an abortion issue, but like, that's kind of where we're at, right? Like you're breaking us down to cells that aren't important, but like if it's on Mars, it's important. But we as a full complex organism are just chemicals. We're just chemicals. Says man's metaphysical pretensions, he said, are preposterous. So this Dr. Pritchett's a piece of work. It is this insistence of man upon meaning that makes him so difficult, said Dr. Pritchett. Once he realizes that he is of no importance whatever in the vast scheme of the universe, that no possible significance can be attached to his activities, that it does not matter whether he lives or dies, he will become much more tractable. So there he hits you with tractable, and tractable means easily managed or controlled. So he waits a minute, and then he hits you with the real reason he wants you to believe this nonsense he's spewing, this absolute bullshit at this party, where he's just trying to indoctrinate his, high-class friends with his friggin' pseudo-philosophical crap, right? Just garbage. And it's real corrupt. And so he wants us to be more controlled. He doesn't want us to believe that we have a purpose, because he wants us to be at whatever whims that they want to pursue. So a free economy cannot exist without competition. Therefore, men must be forced to compete. Therefore, we must control men in order to force them to be free. So here's Dr. Pritchett trying to control men force them to do things. This guy is talking about how we don't have any purpose and there's nothing really spiritual and all this other stuff about us as humans. And then he goes on and says, he has to control us so that we can be free. So there's just a whole bunch of, you know, hypocritical stuff that he spews, but it's all this babbling that makes him sound sophisticated to probably people who don't know any better, right? People who just want to be virtuous or self-righteous, virtue signaling. And so this Dr. Pritchett keeps talking to people and he gets into this conversation. He says, the purpose of philosophy is not to seek knowledge, but to prove that knowledge is impossible to man. So Manly P. Hall wrote about Pythagoras and said in The Secret Teachings of All Ages that Pythagoras changed his name, I believe, to philosopher instead of sage, because philosopher means one who is seeking knowledge. And sage means one who knows. And so I don't know if that was like the beginning of like a corruption. Instead of being somebody who's sure and who actually grasps knowledge and then see someone as somebody who knows, you just always believe you don't know. Or if the true purpose, as we know, probably for Pythagoras was to actually seek knowledge because it does exist. But just because the unknown there's always going to be some element of the unknown doesn't mean there's not an element of the known. So a very young girl asks timidly, what is the real essence of life? Now they're talking to Balf Eubank, not Ralph, Balf Eubank. So a very young girl asks him, what is the real essence of life, Mr. Eubank? And he says, suffering, defeat and suffering. And then she's basically, well, then why are people happy? And he's basically like, that's just a delusion. So you're delusional if you think you're happy. You're delusional if you trust your feelings. You're delusional if you think you have an essence beyond the physical. And that you're not just a bag of cells with meaning, that are meaningless, that need to be controlled by a bag of chemistry, chemistry bags that are chemical bodies that deem that they know better than you do, that you're a worthless piece of shit. So it's getting pretty commie here at this place, and everybody's really like off their rocker, right? There's not a lot of rationality here, and there's also a lack of the spirituality too. It's a very evil party. So it says, men have lost all spiritual values in the pursuit of material production and technological trickery. I mean, I can kind of agree with the fact that material production is not the be all end all. And we can argue that industrialization wasn't the best for humanity. It took us away from nature in a lot of ways. It tore us apart from our essential element. It put us on these 9-to-5 work schedules. It got us conditioned to things we shouldn't be doing. So I'm not going to argue with that, but I will argue the fact that people who have produced things that have made it easier on society, the ideas and the competence and the knowledge and the skills that these people had to produce the things is pretty incredible. And I think we should value the human spirit and the element of that. So Balf goes on to talk about more communist stuff, right? He goes on and says, there should be a law limiting the sale of any book to 10,000 copies. If people were forbidden to buy 1 million copies of the same piece of trash, they would be forced to buy better books. And somebody's like, come on now, like, what if they want the books, right? And he says, that's irrelevant. Who cares if they want the books? Who cares if people like the plot? He says, plot is a primitive vulgarity in literature. So now something essential to literature, which is plot, you have to have a plot. And he's talking about primitive. Primitive means original, right? It's, first, original. And now plot is just, no, it's not necessarily. You don't need that. You don't need plot. And it's vulgar. It's unrefined. It's coarse. It's crap. And then these other incompetent people chime in, like Dr. Pritchett, and say, just as logic is a primitive vulgarity in philosophy. And this guy, Mort Liddy, who's a composer, who's not that great, or who does like small time stuff, says just as melody is a primitive vulgarity in music. So melody is sort of like the basis for the songs that you write, right? And logic is really the basis of philosophical reasoning, like your reasoning, using your reasoning faculty in philosophy and trying to avoid logical fallacies, right? And then he's like, no, we don't need logic. Logic is vulgar, it's coarse, it's unrefined. So this is the kind of garbage that they're spouting here. And then Lillian enters into the discussion as she enters the room, and Val Fewbank is talking about how he's dedicated his new novel to Lillian Rearden, Hank's wife. And she's like, what's the novel about? And he says, frustration, which means to cause to have no effect. So to cause things to come to nothing. Oh, that's great. Dedicate that to me, right? And brother love, feelings of humanity and compassion towards one's fellow humans is what he says is left. After, if everything's about frustration, what's left? This girl asks him. Brother love, compassion for your fellow human being. Yeah, compassion. Real compassionate these guys are. So obviously, who would want to hang out with these people unless you're, buying into their delusions of utopia where they actually are tyrannical forces who get to tell you what's best for you and who want to tell you what industry, who should own what. And they want to take the resources from you who are being productive and give it to somebody who's unproductive. It's absolutely nonsensical. So there's important stuff that happens now because Bertram Scudder, who wrote really, I think, a hit piece on Hank Rearden called The Octopus, is talking to Reardon's brother at the bar. And he's like, listen, whether you like it or not, this equalization of opportunity bill that they're going to pass in Congress, it's a great step forward. The stuff that's going to really limit your brother's business and, try to keep him from furthering the stuff and force him to share his resources with people who are less productive, who didn't do the work, who didn't buy the stuff. And so his brother's like, yeah, well, I support that. And this guy's pretty surprised. He's like, really? It's going to cut your brother's funds back a bit, And he's like, well, I care about the common good. He says, I have contributed my time and money to Friends of Global Progress in their crusade for the equalization of opportunity bill. I think it's perfectly unfair that one man should get all the breaks and leave none to others. So this guy's against his own brother. His brother just gave him $10,000 to support this Friends of Global Progress crap that his brother's involved with, which is now against his business. And here's Hank cutting them a check to do his brother a favor. Unappreciative, completely. And going against your family, putting your family last is this sickness that this book is pointing out right now. This value your family and your race last. Care about them last. Put the rest of the world above your family, above your thing, because it's the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, they'll just take your resources, they'll just take your stuff. And what do they care about your family at the end of the day? It's just insane. It goes against everything that's remotely healthy and moral and good. I do not see why industrialists should be considered at all, said Scudder, when the masses are destitute, and yet there are goods available. It's idiotic to expect people to be stopped by some scrap of paper called a property deed. Property rights are a superstition. One holds property only by the courtesy of those who do not seize it. The people can seize it at any moment. If they can, why shouldn't they? So now, again, attacking private property. We can seize the property, and people who need it should have that property. Well, who defines who needs it? This guy worked for it, so that his family wouldn't need a home. So Cloud Slagenhop says they need it. Need is the only consideration. If people are in need, we've got to seize things first and talk about it afterwards. Oh yeah, let's just take people's private property and then let's just have a discussion about it later. And the discussion is going to be, too bad we took your crap, we robbed you. So Cloud Slagenhop was the president of Friends of Global Progress. So this guy Slagenhop's at this dude's party. So he's got a bill that's going to limit and destroy and hurt Hank Rearden. and he's invited to this party. Lillian invited him. Bertram Scudder wrote a hit piece on her husband, invited him. Philip is working for Friends of Global Progress, who's against him. This is just getting crazy, and all these people are at this guy's house. So Cloud Slagenhop keeps going, and he says, society is suffering for lack of business opportunities at the moment. So we've got the right to seize such opportunities as exist. Right is whatever is good for society. So they're going to seize the business opportunities from the people who are producing them and give them to the people who aren't producing them. That's what this guy is talking about here. This is just absolutely crazy talk to be going on at this guy's house and this guy's party. Considering who he is, the fact that his wife is inviting these people is insane. So then the unexpected happens, and Dagny was invited. Dagny shows up. The black dress seemed excessively revealing because it was astonishing to discover, there we go, astonishing and Dagny again, that the lines of her shoulder were fragile and beautiful, and the diamond band on the wrist of her naked arm gave her the most feminine of all aspects, the look of being chained. So there's something about man carving out a bit of the feminine. This is the emperor and like the empress in the tarot. It gives you a good reference point. And the emperor is constantly carving out his own bit of the feminine, taming it, grooming it, battling against the never-ending vegetation growing over and coming over the fence line. And so these boundaries are like healthy, and then there's something beautiful about taking the energy of nature and cultivating it and doing something with it, giving it that masculine touch. So it's almost like, because Dagny has that to her, that like executive power, she has this sort of feminine beauty that other people lack. So then Dagny and Lillian get into a little bit, things like that go down. And then Reardens just trying to avoid things, and Dagny's basically saying how she doesn't usually come to parties much anymore. And there was a point in here when a businessman whom they knew had approached, smiling at her, delighted astonishment. And he says, but my good man, she's an unusual phenomenon in the field of economics, so you must expect people to talk about her, talking about how Dagny's famous. And he's saying this to James. It says, your sister is a symptom of the illness of our century, a decadence. So decadent means a decline in the morals, product of the machine age. So the machine age is creating women who are going into industry, and he's saying that, that's garbage. And although I agree that the family should be the most important thing and that women themselves have this natural motherly role, to exclude Dagny's proficiency based on those grounds is obviously ridiculous. Nobody would want to. There's a lot of competent women out there. Not saying everybody's fit to run the railroad. Obviously, as a group, feminine energy is not there, but it doesn't mean that she's not. In fact, she's more competent than these men. So, of course, Reardon finds out that his wife has invited this Bertram Scudder, this guy who wrote a hit piece on him. And he's looking at his wife and he goes, how could you invite him here? And she says, now, Henry, let's not be ridiculous here. You must learn to tolerate the opinions of others and respect their right of free speech. And he's like, in my house, I got to, are you kidding me? Right. So he's beyond himself. And all he sees is the article of The Octopus by Bertram Scudder, which was not an expression of ideas, but a bucket of slime emptied in public. An article that did not contain a single fact, not even an invented one, but poured a stream of sneers and adjectives in which nothing was clear except the filthy malice of denouncing without considering proof necessary. So this guy was just like, we're going to just attack him. They didn't provide any facts, and of course they never do, right? These media companies. And, it's a lot like what is going on today, right? We said this book talks about what's going on today. That is, the media controls the narrative. They pump out a bunch of propaganda. There's very little fact or substantialness to it. People don't do their research, like they didn't do their research about the San Sebastian mine. And then, bam, everybody's buying all this. Humans are a bag of nothing. Humans are a mix of chemicals and protoplasm, and they're basically worthless. Yeah, it's just garbage. But yet, we're worthless, but we have to be ultimately virtuous and sacrifice our lives for our neighbors. It's just ridiculous. So then, a little bit later on, he's recovering from this Bertram Scudder crap. And he stops short and he sees this tall, arrogant figure of a man who had paused for a moment before entering. It was Francisco d'Anconia. So now d'Anconia shows up at this house. So d'Anconia is now here. And apparently, Rearden doesn't like d'Anconia. So Rearden had never given much thought to men like Bertram Scudder. But with every hour of his life, with the strain and the pride of every moment when his muscles or his mind had ached from effort, with every step he had taken to rise out of the mines of Minnesota, and to turn his effort into gold, with all of his profound respect for money and for its meaning. And so, if you don't know, Dion Fortune describes in her book, The Mystical Kabbalah, she says that money is the symbol of human energy, which makes a lot of sense. You control people with money. What do you control? You control their output, their human energy. People put their energy into the work that they do. So, yeah, people put their energy into the work that they do. And so you're controlling people's energy by controlling the money supply. So, with all his profound respect for money and for its meaning, he despised the squanderer who did not know how to deserve the great gift of inherited wealth. There, he thought, was the most contemptible representative of the species. So he's pretty upset that d'Anconia is there. He thinks this guy is trash because he inherited a family fortune, and what he sees in the tabloids is this guy, conned a bunch of people into believing in these mines in Mexico, screwed Taggart Transcontinental, who he's allied with at the moment, and nobody got paid on this guy, so he's not producing, and he got all this money, and he's just being a wasteful playboy. So Reardon's like, this guy is like the lowest of the low, because there's these like leeches over at the paper, but then there's this guy who doesn't even deserve the money he got. And then d'Anconia walks in and starts talking to these commies who are, Dr. Pritchett and Eubanks and everybody else. And he's specifically referring to Dr. Pritchett, he's the guy that came after his philosophy teacher at the same university, Patrick Henry University. And d'Anconia, people ask, just what did Hugh Axton teach, which is the guy who came before Dr. Pritchett? And Francisco answered, he taught that everything is something. So you have Dr. Pritchett saying that everything is nothing and that humans are nothing. And this is, all this garbage. And then you have d'Anconia saying the guy who came before him, he said everything is something. So kind of just like throws a dig in at this guy. And then James Taggart comes in, right? So now James enters the fold. He's pissed. And he wants an audience with d'Anconia, who's now showed up, and d'Anconia had refused to see him. So he's like, I tried to get in touch with you. I tried to talk to you, and you blew me off. And so d'Anconia says, listen, are you trying to hide from me the fact that I refused to see you, which I thought was brilliant, right? He's like, yeah, bitch, I didn't want to see you. And d'Anconia says, I couldn't imagine what you wanted to speak to me about. And James Taggart goes, the nationalization, what are you going to do about it? d'Anconia answers, nothing. And then d'Anconia goes on, but surely you don't want me to do anything about it. My mines and your railroad were seized by the will of the people. You wouldn't want me to oppose the will of the people, would you? Francisco, this is not a laughing matter, James, hits him with. I'm entitled to an explanation. Why did you waste all those millions? What sort of rotten swindle was it? And then d'Anconia says, I thought you'd approve of it. I thought you would consider the San Sebastian mines as the practical realization of an ideal of the highest moral order. Remembering that you and I have disagreed so often in the past, I thought you would be gratified to see me acting in accordance with your principles, which is just great. He's just like, what a great, this guy blew 15 million. He's just throwing it right in Taggart's face. All this bullshit that Taggart was preaching these last few chapters, all this good of humanity, help our neighbors, the work is in need, right? And so Taggart's like, what are you talking about? And Francisco lets him know, I don't know why you should call my behavior rotten. I thought you would recognize it as an honest effort to practice what the whole world is preaching. Doesn't everyone believe that it is evil to be selfish? Isn't it evil to pursue a personal interest? I had no personal interest in it whatever. Isn't it evil to work for profit? I didn't work for profit. I took a loss. Doesn't everyone agree that the purpose and justification of an industrial enterprise are not production, but the livelihood of its employees? The San Sebastian mines were the most eminently successful venture in industrial history. So, eminently meaning rising above all others. They produced no copper, but they provided a livelihood for thousands of men who could not have achieved in a lifetime the equivalent of what they got for one day's work. So he's like, I paid a bunch of worthless people, which they could not do. Yeah, because they were worthless to him because they couldn't do the work he paid them for. Isn't it generally agreed that an owner is a parasite and an exploiter, that it is the employees who do all the work and make the product possible? He says, I did not exploit anyone. I did not burden the San Sebastian mines with my useless presence. I left them in the hands of the men who count. I did not pass judgment on the value of that property. I turned it over to a mining specialist. He was not a very good specialist, but he needed the job very badly. Isn't it generally conceded that when you hire a man for a job, it is his need that counts, not his ability? Doesn't everyone believe that in order to get the goods, all you have to do is need them? I have carried out every moral precept of our age. I expected gratitude and a citation of honor. I do not understand why I'm being damned. That was freaking great. So D'Anconia hits Taggart over the head with this, right? It's like, you guys should be giving me an honor. You just preached all this BS. I just paid everybody and there was nothing to pay them for. I just built all these houses. There was nothing to build it for. We just gave them all this infrastructure and there was nothing. We did it for no reason, no profit, no gain. Isn't it not about money, right? Like, how great. And then James, of course, he's like, you don't expect me to take this seriously. And of course, Taggart doesn't take it seriously now, right? Because it's cutting into his bottom line. And now he looks like an idiot because he, told all his friends to back this BS. And they used all these justifications of helping your neighbors and humanity and the good of this, but then they fail, they don't realize that they didn't do any of their research because they're not productive. They bet on D'Anconia and now they're mad at him because he's usually productive and they couldn't just rely on him to do their homework for them. D'Anconia answers, he says, there was a time when I did not believe that anyone could take it seriously. I was wrong. And Taggart comes back at him. It's perfectly outrageous to treat your public responsibilities with such thoughtless levity. So basically, like with lightness or happiness. So he's basically saying, D'Anconia, you're not taking shit seriously. It's like, well, you guys haven't been taking stuff seriously this whole time. So D'Anconia really makes them eat their words. Then we flip back to Dagny a little bit at the party, and Dagny is wondering why she accepted the invitation to this party in the first place, and then she realizes, well, I did it because I wanted to see Hank Rearden. She's like, oh, wow. Yeah, I actually wanted to see this guy. Rearden's face, the pale blue eyes, the ash blonde hair had the firmness of ice. The uncompromising clarity of its lines made it look among the others as if he were moving through a fog, hit by a ray of light. So there's a lot of sunlight and illumination occurring, the darkness, the light. We're having a struggle between these forces at the moment. There's a sense of the darkness being there, and then there's this like shining ray almost that Rearden contains in a sense. They're sort of painting the picture of that in this chapter. And then some crazy stuff happens because Rearden didn't want D'Anconia to be introduced to him. But D'Anconia finds Rearden and says, permit me to introduce myself. My name is D'Anconia. So D'Anconia tells him, listen, if you want me to leave, I'll leave. And he's being straight with him. And Rearden really appreciates that. And he's like, wow, this guy's he wasn't what I expected. And Rearden says, why would you wish to speak to me? And D'Anconia replies, my motivation cannot interest you at present. And Rearden comes back at him. Mine is not the sort of conversation that could interest you at all. And then D'Anconia corrects him. You are mistaken about one of us, Mr. Rearden, or both. I came to this party solely in order to meet you. What did you want to meet me for? In order to make me lose money? He says to D'Anconia, and D'Anconia says yes, eventually. So he's straight with him the whole time. And Rearden loves this because he's like, wow, this dude's straight. He's not BS and he's not wasting my time. So he's finding that he likes talking to D'Anconia a little bit, even though he still thinks he's still got that sort of contempt for him. This, you're a worthless piece of garbage, not really worth my time. So Reardon's startled glance at him was like the involuntary thrust of a hand grasping for support in a desperate need. The glance betrayed how much he wanted to find the sort of man he thought he was seeing. So Reardon's realizing, like, wow, D'Anconia's the kind of guy I've been waiting for. This is the man. This is the type of dude I've been waiting to see. He's finally in my presence, but I have all this sort of hatred built up about his image and who he is. Francisco looked silently out at the darkness. So they're both sitting by a window looking out across towards the factory. Dim shapes kept sweeping through space and vanishing, shapes which were branches but looked as if they were the fury of the wind made visible. So this is where it gets interesting, right? Branches and fury of the wind made visible. So fury is it's seeming like this is Ayn Rand's way of saying D'Anconia wants vengeance because fury means vengeance, right? Fury means intense, disordered, and often destructive rage, an avenging spirit. So is that what D'Anconia is doing? Is he avenging the wrongs that all these people have done? And is he against Rearden and Taggart right now because they're still trying to save a dying system? They're still trying to save the people who are incompetent. D'Anconia goes on, he says, it's a terrible night for any animal caught unprotected on that plane. And then Hank Rearden goes, you told me what I was thinking just a while ago. It's funny how you can read my mind almost. And D'Anconia says, shall I tell you the rest of the words? Rearden's like, give it a shot, you know? And D'Anconia says, you stood here and watched the storm with the greatest pride one can ever feel because you are able to have summer flowers and half-naked women in your house on a night like this, in demonstration of your victory over that storm. And if it weren't for you, most of those who are here would be left helpless at the mercy of that wind in the middle of some such plain. And D'Anconia's spot on again, and Rearden goes, how did you know that? In time with his question, Rearden realized that it was not his thoughts this man had named, but his most hidden, most personal emotion, and that he, who would never confess his emotions to anyone, had confessed it in his question. He saw the faintest flicker in Francisco's eyes, as of a smile or a check mark. And then D'Anconia reveals, this is what I felt once when I was young. So he felt the same thing. He felt like it was good that he could, give all these people this money and this protection from the storm. Rearden's still a little uncomfortable with this revelation of his feelings, and he says, why do you want to talk about it? And D'Anconia lets him know, let us say by way of gratitude, Mr. Rearden. Gratitude to me, if you will accept it. I haven't asked for gratitude. I don't need it. I have not said you needed it, but of all those whom you are saving from the storm tonight, I am the only one who will offer it. So D'Anconia is really like winning some favor here, even though he's not meaning to, right? That might be his intention, but Rearden's finding out that D'Anconia is not this bum that he had imagined. And so basically Rearden comes around to tell D'Anconia that it's not a burden to take care of his family, because D'Anconia is like, well, you got all these people. Why do you even take care of them? They don't appreciate you. They don't care about you. Basically, look at who you work for. And Rearden's like, I'm not playing this game. You're not going to talk crap like me. He's like, I don't even notice the burden of taking care of them, And D'Anconia says, why don't you tell them that you're working for your own sake and not theirs? And Rearden says, they know it. He goes, oh, yes, they know it. Every single one of them here knows it, but they don't think you do. And the aim of all their efforts is to keep you from knowing it. So D'Anconia reveals to him that his family doesn't know that he knows that he's working for himself. They think that he thinks that he's working for them. And if he finds out that he's working for himself, then he might not need them. It's a powerful revelation. And D'Anconia tells him, he's like, they have a weapon against you, a terrible one. And Rearden's like, where do you see any of that? Where's the evidence for that? And D'Anconia lets him know, in the unforgivable fact that you are as unhappy as you are. And so Rearden asks him what his motive is. What are you doing? What's your motive here? Danconia says, let us say to give you the words you need for the time when you'll need them. Why should you want to speak to me on such a subject? In the hope that you'll remember it. What he felt, thought Rearden, was anger at the incomprehensible fact that he had allowed himself to enjoy this conversation. So he's really enjoying himself in this combo. He's really wanting to talk to Danconia. I am the only one who will offer it if you will accept it. He heard the words in the strangely solemn inflection of the quiet voice and an inexplicable answer of his own. Something within him that wanted to cry yes, to accept, to tell this man that he accepted, that he needed it. Though there was no name for what he needed, it was not gratitude, and he knew that it was not gratitude that this man had meant. So whatever Danconia had, Rearden wanted, and I'm thinking it's a bit of illumination. Danconia's coming in and shining a light here. He's understanding what the insides of Rearden. And Rearden's like, I needed somebody to shine a light in these spots. It's like I needed to get in touch with this. I needed somebody else outside myself who could understand this. And so Rearden tells him, to me, there's only one form of human depravity, the man without a purpose. Danconia agrees, that's true. So then Dagny creeps up on them and she's overhearing the conversation. And she wants to listen to what they're saying. And she basically overhears a little bit of it, and then she goes out and starts to talk to Rearden himself, and they have like their own little dialogue, and she's talking about the party and how these guests really kind of suck. And she says, it's just a thought that disturbs me once in a while. I keep thinking that parties are intended to be celebrations, and celebrations should be only for those who have something to celebrate. And I always say this. I've been saying this for years to my best friend. I always say, what are we even celebrating? You get these people, they go to, all these different holidays. They're Christian holidays, they're this, they're that. And it's like, nobody's interested in talking about anything real. They're all just hanging out. There's no depth to the event. It's just there. There's a tree, there's presents, there's food. But like Dagny said in the beginning, do they expect these things to make these things great? No, it's the people who make the things. And I've always agreed, because I'm like, why are we even wasting our time with this? If we're, why are we celebrating? What are we even celebrating? Dagny tells Rearden, why have we left it all to fools? It should have been ours, which I thought was cool. It should be. It should be the people who want to grow, expand, produce, create, explore. That should be the people, right, who are throwing these parties. But often, right, it's not, because they're too busy. Feeling dimly that she had revealed too much, yet knowing what she had revealed. So dimly is where we get into some stuff, because dimly means emitting or having a limited amount of light, right? So dimly, we got the Richard Halley, we got the Sun opera that he wrote with Phaethon and Helios and carrying the sun across in a chariot. We have the alloy, the opera, the heat of the steel, like the sun. Rand compares the heat of that first steel of Rearden metal to the sun. And you have all these connections now starting to come together. And then there's something dim going on, right? She's feeling dimly. She shrugged, the movement running through the curve of her shoulder like a faint convulsion. She noticed a small group huddled by the unlighted fireplace. So she notices that there's an unlighted fireplace. The room was not cold, but they sat as if they drew comfort from the thought of a non-existent fire. So illumination is missing, and people are craving it. And this is being painted again and again. Richard Halley's Fifth Concerto, the quintessence, the spiritual essence. The fourth is the power, right? But this is something else. And then she walks right into a conversation of women who are saying, what frightens me is night and darkness. And that's fear of the shadows, right? Fear of illumination, fear of the darkness. With day comes night, with dark comes light, right? So the speaker was an elderly spinster. So a spinster is a woman whose occupation is to spin, but also it's an unmarried woman. And there's a few of them, there's three of them. So just like the three Erinyes, right? The weavers of fate, the Furies. And so there was talk about fury in the branches, and now there's these people who are afraid of the darkness, and now we've run into fate almost. That there's something fated here. Every evening when it grows dark, I get the feeling that this time it is final. The daylight will not return, one of these spinsters is saying. And then they go on and they start talking about everybody down the shore knows what it was. It was Ragnar Daneskjold. It was the Coast Guard trying to catch him. So Ragnar Daneskjold is a pirate, and the Coast Guard's trying to catch him. But Ragnar is like Ragnarok, like warrior or judgment. Judgment meaning the end of the world and the rebuilding of the world. So just like the tower in the first chapter is coming down, and then we're having the structures of society plummeting and then having to be rebuilt. And Dagny and Rearden and trying to rebuild them, and Danconia almost like seeming like he's ready to just fulfill this Ragnarok. He sees the inevitable course of action, and he's trying to bring it to its conclusion and almost control it in his own way, it would seem to me right now. So Daneskjold, the last name of this pirate guy, is called Dane's Shield. So shield against the judgment of the light. So Rearden's afraid of that part of himself and to deal with that part of himself with his family. You know, Dagny's struggling between her feminine aspects and her masculine aspects here, right? And her desires and such. And there's a lot of things now needing to come to light, but we're lacking illumination, which she's painting the picture. The big ship with the relief supplies we're sending to the People's State of France was seized by this pirate guy. So this guy took the relief supplies. He took the thing that was going to make everything all better. If there ever was a man born without a heart, they said, he's it. The sailor said. So this Ragnar Daneskjold, right? He is a man born without a heart. Leo, the sun. We're getting a lot of references here to this. So these spinsters just keep talking about this. And did you know that Ragnar Daneskjold went to school in this country? Sure, the Patrick Henry University. So that's where Danconia went, and I was already noticing the connections between this pirate guy and Danconia. And Daneskjold is a shield against Ragnar, which is Ragnarok, judgment. So that's how I'm interpreting it etymologically. I kind of looked this all up, tried to figure it out, and here's where we are. I thought things like that could happen only in the wastelands, only in Europe, but a big-scale outlaw of that kind operating in Delaware in our day and age, he's been seen off Nantucket too, which is close to where I live, Rhode Island. Well, it's where I live. And at Bar Harbor, the newspapers in Maine, we're asked not to write about it. So the newspapers aren't writing about this pirate guy who's doing this shit. What does that tell you? The newspaper's not reporting to the people. They're off on their own shit. So somebody goes, why? So they don't want people to know that the Navy can't handle it. So the government and the newspapers are now working together to suppress this information from the people. Somebody says, I don't like it. It feels funny. It's like something out of the Dark Ages. So again, more play with the darkness. And then some lady comes out with, I read an article, said one of the women tonelessly. It said that the times of trouble are good for us. It is good that people are growing poorer. To accept privations is a moral virtue. So now we need to accept having less limitations because the newspapers say so. You see what's happening here? They're not reporting to you on what the hell's going on. And then they're lying to you and tell you, oh, it's moral and virtuous, but yet you're not even spiritual and you're worthless. Can you see the contradictions here? Nobody can help what he does. There is nothing we can do about anything. We must learn to bear it. So again, we got to learn to bear all the BS because these people don't want to produce. They just want to play production. They just want to play savior and hero, but they're not really. What's the use anyway? What is man's fate? So again, she now links to fate. Fate was tied in with the page before with the spinsters spinning fate, spinning the thread of fate. And the Furies, which Danconia is now connected with because of the fury of the branches. Someone says, oh, well, who is John Galt? And a lady goes, I know who John Galt is. And Dagny's like, tell me, because I've been waiting to find out who the hell this guy is. And she says, who? Dagny asks her tensely. And she says, well, a great aunt of mine, he was there and he saw it happen, or said he was there and saw it happen, the sinking of Atlantis. And so Dagny's like, okay, Atlantis, yeah. And this lady goes, yeah, the Isle of the Blessed. That is what the Greeks called it. Thousands of years ago, they said Atlantis was a place where hero spirits lived in happiness, unknown to the rest of the earth, a place which only the spirits of heroes could enter. And they reached it without dying because they carried the secret of life within them. Atlantis was lost to mankind even then, but the Greeks knew that it had existed. They tried to find it. Some of them said it was underground, hidden in the heart of the earth, but most of them said it was an island, a radiant island in the Western Ocean. Perhaps what they were thinking of was America. They never found it for centuries afterward. Men said it was only a legend. They did not believe it, but they never stopped looking for it because they knew that that was what they had to find. Well, what about John Galt? Dagny says. He found it. And then Dagny's interest was gone. John Galt was a millionaire sailing his yacht one night in mid-Atlantic when he found it. He saw the towers of Atlantis shining on the bottom of the ocean. So the towers, it was a sight of such kind that when one had seen it, one could no longer wish to look at the rest of the earth. John Galt sank his ship and went down with his entire crew. They all chose to do it. My friend was the only one who survived. So, all this shit happens. And then basically, Francisco tells Lady, Dagny doesn't believe it, but I do. And then the lady's kind of like, was just joking. But then D'Anconia says, the joke's on that fool woman. She doesn't know that she was telling you the truth. And then Dagny's like, do you expect me to believe that? And of course, he says no. And we go on about that for a minute. And then D'Anconia makes Dagny blush because he says, Dagny, what a magnificent waste. And that's kind of what she was kind of thinking, probably about the party and Rearden and all this bullshit. So she feels herself blushing for the first time in years, blushing because she knew suddenly that the sentence named what she had felt all evening. And then some guy comes in and puts on Halley's concerto, the fourth one, and it rose in tortured triumph, speaking its denial of pain, its hymn to a distant vision. Dagny and Rearden also deny their pain. Tower, the destruction of Halley's tune. So more of this tower concept being piled on. It was Halley's melody torn apart, its whole stuffed with hiccoughs. Yet it was still the remnant of Halley's melody that gave it form. It was the melody that supported it like a spinal cord. So the spinal cord, the heart, Leonian. Leo rules the spinal cord and the heart in astrology. So we got that whole thing going on. So Dagny stands staring at the room as if one sense could replace another, as if sight could wipe out sound. So there they are with the illumination again. The hymn to a distant vision is a song of praise to a vision, right? The vision is seeing something beyond normal sight. So there's normal sight, there's that, but then there's illumination, something beyond. There's a vision, something beyond normal sight. Halley's concerto is talking about it, but then these people are destroying it. So they're destroying the vision. They're destroying this Atlantean concept where there's this something just even better, where men never stop pursuing it. So Dagny's like about had enough. And she's like, I'm done with all this nonsense. They're ruining Halley's concerto, that guy who does the compositions. That was his piece. And she's about to run out of there when Lillian grabs her and says, it's a very special gift from my husband. Oh, yes, of course it's hideous, but don't you see? It's supposed to be priceless. Of course, I'd exchange it for a common diamond bracelet any time. But somehow nobody will offer me one for it, even though it's so very, very valuable. Why, my dear? It's the first thing ever made of Rearden metal. And Dagny just like loses it. She says, "Give me that bracelet." And Lillian's mouth moved into an upturned crescent as Dagny presented her with her diamond bracelet. She snapped the metal bracelet open, dropped it on Dagny's palm, and took the diamond band. So she trades this chain, the first thing off Reardon metal, something from his blood, sweat, and tears, her husband's blood, sweat, and tears, that his heart went into, this creation. She gets the first bit of it and hands it over to Dagny for the diamonds, for the diamond bracelet. And everybody's like, wow, I can't believe she did that. And then Reardon gets all weird on her, because he's like, she kind of, put my wife in her place and shouldn't have done that at my party. So she clasped the metal bracelet on her wrist. She liked the weight against her skin. Inexplicably, she felt a touch of feminine vanity, the kind she had never experienced before, the desire to be seen wearing this particular ornament. So she's proud, she's excessively proud of this thing that Reardon's accomplished, and she's proud to be wearing it. She's never seen something so valuable to her. She sees what's really valuable. And then Reardon tells her, listen, that was not necessary. You shouldn't have done that. And okay, so then in chapter 6, what happens is after the party, Reardon goes back up to his wife's bedroom. Reardon enters his wife's bedroom. She lay in bed on pillows of pale green linen. Her bed jacket was pale green satin. The light shaded a tone of apple blossoms. So this is very interesting now, because there was a green vase in Reardon's office when Dagny was there a couple chapters ago. I think it was jade. And Saturn, the planet Saturn, represents, or the energy, the color of Saturn is pure green ray. And then the green is either lighter or darker depending on whether it's in Capricorn or Aquarius. So the green ray of Saturn, the ray itself of Saturn. So a ray being a straight line. So from a point with a line protruding out would be a ray. So think of a ray from the sun coming down. Well, Saturn's ray is pure green. And Saturn itself is this the ray itself of Saturn represents the highest attainment of the individual self, the I, in astrology and in the occult. And so Rand almost teases this because in matter, the I becomes one with all things because it gets drowned out in a multitude of people, right? In a multitude of things. And then in spirit and pure substance of spirit, it blends again with all things. So at either end of the spectrum, this highly unique individualized part of yourself can become one with everything else by blending itself. And if you remember, so this was the description about Reardon when they talked about Dagny wanting to come to the party to see him. Reardon's face, the pale blue eyes, the ash blonde hair. So right there, what you have is honestly a coating of blue and yellow, right? The ash blonde hair, the blonde yellowish hair. So yeah, because blonde hair is kind of yellow. And between blue and yellow is the green ray, okay, of Saturn. So you think of a triangle, a cross rather, and at one end is Libra, at one end is Aries, at the top is Capricorn, which is Saturn, the green ray. And then in the middle of blue and yellow is green. So it connects through those colors. That's why you'll see it a lot in movies. You'll see blue and yellow on a character, and then you'll see green. Or you'll just see blue and yellow on a character, which denotes the pure green ray in the in-between. So here they are. Reardon's face, ash blonde hair, had the firmness of ice. The uncompromising clarity of its lines made it look among the others as if he were moving through a fog, hit by a ray of light. A ray of light. Pure green light. So, wow. We don't find out that that ray of light is him, but he's got the green jade vase that they already made mention of. His wife is wearing green. She has apple blossoms. Now, apples are knowledge, right? Gnosis, the knowledge of the self and the knowledge of good and evil, right? Why had she married him? He thought, not asked himself on their wedding day 8 years ago. He had not asked himself on their wedding day 8 years ago. Since then, in tortured loneliness, he had asked it many times. He had found no answer. So he doesn't know why he married this woman. She's going on about the party. He's in her bedroom, and you kind of find out that he only goes in her bedroom when he kind of is ready to get laid, and he kind of hates himself for it. And so it was Lillian's austerity that attracted him. She had an air of mystery that seemed to tell him he would never break through her proud detachment, and an air of amusement, mocking her own desire and his. His dedication to work was like one of the fires he dealt with, a fire that burned every lesser element, every impurity of the white stream of single metal. So he's not really focused on women. He's focused on achievement, Reardon is. He's going out there and he's like, I just want to get it. But once in a while, he has this desire and it's violent and he just like has to let it out. So that's a very Martian thing, right? Mars sort of going out there, taking action on it. So he came to believe the doctrine that this desire was wholly physical, a desire not of consciousness, but of matter. So he says this desire is not spiritual at all. And he rebelled against the thought that his flesh could be free to choose and that its choice was impervious to the will of his mind. So he's saying, I don't believe my mind can't penetrate this desire. I don't believe my mind doesn't get to rule the day here. He found it intolerable that he should be unable to control the matter of his own body. He fought it. He had won his every battle against inanimate nature, but this was a battle he lost. So he's, molding reality through production and through mining and through enterprise and building and making money. But now he's not able to deal with this part of himself, this desire for intimacy, sex. And what you find out is that really he wants a victory. He wants to triumph over a woman. And he thinks by like having one as his possession, by giving them his name, that's the best way to do it. It was the difficulty of the conquest that made him want Lillian. To drag her down were the words in his mind. They gave him a dark pleasure, the sense of a victory worth winning. So Rearden wants to win something, but he gets the woman and he's empty inside. He cannot understand why he thought it was an obscene conflict. So the sign of some secret depravity within him. Why he felt at the same time a profound pride at the thought of granting to a woman the title of his wife. So he's like, I want to give you my last name and I want to give you the title of my wife. And that is, a sense of pride for him, to honor a woman by the act of possessing her. Lillian seemed to fit the image he had not known. The pride, the purity, the rest was in himself. He did not know that he was looking at a reflection. So there it is, right? Saturn ruling business, commerce, banking, right? Structures in the structure of business and reality. The pure green ray of Saturn creating an almost spiritual substance of I, right? Unique and individualized. And then now we realize that his wife is just a reflection of him. He's actually trying to control and battle and dominate himself. And he's feeling freaking tortured about this. Reardon's like stressed out the fact that, he has these desires and you know what? He's faithful and he gave his word to his wife and he's not going to go back on it, even though he's not happy with her and he doesn't really love her like that. He doesn't like her. So his desire for her had died in the first week of their marriage. He told himself that he deserved the torture because he had wished never to touch her again and was unable to maintain his decision. So he would just let himself go into her room and have sex and basically hate himself for it. He became convinced that the need was depravity. So the need to have sex, to be intimate with another. And she was just a body that he used. And she was just like him. So basically, he's just at war with himself. I'm being tortured by myself. And she's the outward reflection of that torture. Because I've been through such a hard life, I've been so determined, it seems, he's going to not allow himself to break this bondage. He's a slave to his own word. He's a slave to his own promise. The structure of marriage isn't working for him, and that in this marriage isn't working for him. So through the quiet agony of the years of his marriage, he would not permit himself to consider the thought of infidelity. He had given his word. He intended to keep it. It was not loyalty to Lillian. It was not the person of Lillian that he wished to protect from dishonor, but the person of his wife. So this part of him, this possession that he bestowed this honor upon, he is not going to disgrace it through some depraved act of infidelity. Evil, depraved meaning evil. What did she want from him, he thought? What was she after? In the universe as he knew it, there was no answer. So he's not happy with her. He doesn't really like her. And he's just with her. He's trying to question this. And then you see the coding of the alchemical connections between the sun and the moon, between Halley's opera and the 19-year great cycle, and all these things starting to come together, between D'Anconia sort of knowing what everybody's thinking. And we see Reardens linked to Saturn and even the negative parts of it, right? Where Saturn is so disciplined, so strict, and so stern that it creates a structure that doesn't allow for full human expression. It's focused too much on the material and the mundane side of life, making money and doing those things, that he's missing the spiritual essence of it. And Dagny in this chapter actually lets Reardon know, hey, you're missing the point. We should be the ones giving the parties. We should be the ones celebrating, because we add the life, we add the production, the competence, the intellect into everything. We are creating the very things that make these parties possible. The lights, the goods, the services. It is our rationality that provides the very structure for which these parties can be made. And I don't think, obviously, Reardon wasn't thinking like that. And so now we find out in this chapter that Reardon's got some weak spots, and it's in the fact that he hasn't connected his spiritual nature, this pure green ray of Saturn, and brought it down into the material realm. And he's trying to ignore that part of himself. He's trying to cut off the fact that it's actually a conscious process and a spiritual process, and he's trying to blame it all on matters of the flesh and control them like he controls his minds. And there are just certain things that don't lend themselves to that. So obviously, between D'Anconia, and D'Anconia might be funding this pirate guy or not, I have no idea, because he went to Patrick Henry University. He might know this guy. We have no idea. But this pirate guy who's Ragnar something, Jord, and the fact that this guy is taking French relief ships and all this other stuff, it should be pretty interesting when we get to the next chapter, start to see how this all unfolds. Because is D'Anconia trying to bring down the system in a controlled manner on his own end, because he saw what they were doing, and he said, if we want to play that game, then I'll just accelerate it for you. I'll win at the game you've set up, at the board you set up for me. That's kind of what I think right now, right? That's a common conclusion. Like, if you want communism, I'll shove it down your throat and then destroy all of you with your own weapon. Because D'Anconia's smart. He can master anything. So he's like, I'm not going to play the production game anymore, because you set the rules differently. I'll play this non-competent game. And so maybe he's going to tank everybody's business and build back on his own. He'd build back better, right? D'Anconia style, which won't be so cucked out. All right. I'll see you for chapter 7.